The Sino-Albanian split refers to the gradual worsening of relations between Albania and the People's Republic of China in the period 1972 to 78. Both countries had supported each other in the Soviet Albanian and Sino-Soviet splits, together declaring the necessity of defending Marxism-Leninism against what they regarded as Soviet revisionism within the international communist movement. By the early 1970s, however, Albanian disagreements with certain aspects of Chinese policy deepened as the visit of Nixon to China along with the Chinese announcement of the Three Worlds theory produced strong apprehension in Albania's leadership under Enver Hoxha. Hoxha saw in these events an emerging Chinese alliance with American imperialism and abandonment of proletarian internationalism. In 1978, China broke off its trade relations with Albania, signaling an end to the informal alliance which existed between the two states' origins. In September 1956, Enver Hoxha headed a delegation of the Central Committee of the Party of Labour of Albania at the 8th Congress of the Communist Party of China. Writing years later of his impressions of the country before the visit, he noted that, "We had followed with sympathy the just war of the fraternal Chinese people against the Japanese fascists and aggressors, Chiang Kai-shek reaction and the American interference. We knew also that at the head of the Communist Party of China was Mao Zedong, about whom personally, as well as about the party which he led, we had no information other than what we heard from the Soviet comrades. Both during this period and after 1949 we had not had the opportunity to read any of the works or writings of Mao Zedong, who was said to be a philosopher and to have written a whole series of works. We welcomed the victory of October 1, 1949 with heartfelt joy, and we were among the first countries to recognize the new Chinese state and establish fraternal relations with it. Although greater possibilities and ways were now opened for more frequent and closer contacts and links between our two countries, these links remained at the level of friendly, cultural and commercial relations, the sending of some second-rank delegation, mutual support, according to the occasion, through public speeches and statements, the exchange of telegrams on the occasion of celebrations and anniversaries, and almost nothing more. Khrushchev's rehabilitation of Tito in Yugoslavia and his secret speech in February 1956 put the Soviet leadership at odds with its Albanian counterpart. According to the Albanians, the Khrushchev group's approaches to the Yugoslav revisionists and its open denigration of Joseph Stalin were the first open distortions of an ideological and political character, which were opposed by the PLA. After arriving in Beijing on September 13, Hoxha held his first meeting with Mao Zedong in between sessions of the party's Congress. Mao's first two questions concerned Yugoslav-Albanian ties and the Albanians' opinion on Stalin. Hoxha replied that Albania's relations with Yugoslavia were cold, and he gave Mao a brief outline, dwelling on some of the key moments of the anti-Albanian and anti-Marxist activity of the Yugoslav leadership. On the subject of Stalin, Hoxha stated that the PLA considered him a leader of very great, all-round merits, a loyal disciple of Lenin and continuer of his work. Mao argued that the 1948 Information Bureau decision to expel Yugoslavia was incorrect, and also stressed what he considered to have been Stalin's mistakes in regard to China. Hoxha later recalled that, "Our impressions from this meeting were not what we had expected. We were especially disappointed over the things we heard from the mouth of Mao about the Information Bureau, Stalin and the Yugoslav question. However, we were even more surprised and worried by the proceedings of the 8th Congress. The whole platform of this Congress was based on the theses of the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Indeed, in certain directions, the theses of Khrushchev had been carried further forward. Apart from other things, in the reports which Luchowki Deng Xiaoping and Zhou Enlai delivered one after the other at the 8th Congress. They defended and further deepened the permanent line of the Communist Party of China for extensive collaboration with the bourgeoisie and the kulaks, argued in support of the great blessings which would come to socialism from treating capitalists, merchants, and bourgeois intellectuals well and placing them in high leading positions. Vigorously propagated the necessity of collaboration between the working class and the national bourgeoisie, and between the Communist Party and the other democratic nationalist parties, in the conditions of socialism, etc., etc. In fact, the 100 Flowers and the 100 Schools of Mao Zedong constituted the Chinese variant of the bourgeois revisionist theory and practice about the free circulation of ideas and people, about the coexistence of a hodgepodge of ideologies, trends, schools and coteries within socialism. According to Hoxha, Mao at the 1957 International Conference of the Communist and Workers' Parties declared that, if Stalin were here, we would find it difficult to speak like this. When I met Stalin, before him I felt like a pupil in front of his teacher, while with Comrade Khrushchev we speak freely like equal comrades, and condemned the anti-party group of Molotov and others. Hoxha also claimed that Mao expressed regret that the Yugoslavs refused to attend the conference, with Mao speaking of those who are 100% Marxists, and others who are 80%, 70% or 50%. Indeed, there are some who may be only 10% Marxists. We ought to talk even with those who are 10% Marxists, because there are only advantages in this. Why should we not gather, 2 or 3 of us, in a small room and talk things over? Why should we not talk, proceeding from the desire for unity? In Hoxha's view, the refusal of the Yugoslavs to attend, as well as both Soviet and Chinese desires to enhance their prestige in the world communist movement in response to events over the previous year, produced a situation where the 1957 Moscow Declaration, resulting from the conference, in general, was a good document, owing to its emphasis on opposing revisionism, which both the Soviets and Chinese found advantageous to stress at the time. According to William E. Griffith, the Chinese position on international affairs had begun to shift to the left owing to deepening contradictions with the Soviet Union and the failure of the 100 Flowers campaign at home. Only when the Chinese decided, in 1957 and openly in 1960, to challenge Soviet domination of the communist bloc did they seriously look around for allies whom they were ready and willing to support. By 1960 the Albanians found themselves in ideological agreement with the Chinese. As Ales Bibridge notes, the Chinese had criticized Khrushchev for his rapprochement with Tito, and considered the toleration of Yugoslav revisionism dangerous to the entire communist bloc. Although the seeds of the Sino-Soviet conflict were sown during Stalin's time, policy differences between Beijing and Moscow emerged during the mid and the late 1950s. Coinciding with the deterioration of Albanian-Soviet relations, the Chinese found the Albanians useful owing to their hostility to perceived Soviet revisionism, with Albanian articles on the subject being reprinted in the Chinese media. In November 1960, the Second International Conference of the Communist and Workers' Parties was to be held, and a commission was created in October to prepare for it. The Albanian delegation headed by Hysni Capo and the Chinese delegation headed by Deng Xiaoping, however, were at odds. Capo's speech to the commission criticized the Soviet handling of the Bucharest Conference and its attacks on China, whereas Deng stated that, "We are not going to speak about all the issues. We are not going to use such terms as opportunist or revisionist, etc." Neither Capo nor Ramiz Alia felt this stand was correct, with Hoxha sending letters to the delegation calling Deng's speeches spineless, and further replying that they are not for carrying the matter through to the end, they are for mending what can be mended, and time will mend the rest. If I were in the Soviets' shoes, I would accept the field which the Chinese are opening to me. Because there I will find good grass and can browse at will. Alia thus wrote that on the subject of principles, the Chinese were concerned only about the Soviet conductor's baton, which they wanted to break. They went no further. Nonetheless, Hoxha recalled years later that, concerning the breakdown in relations between China and the Soviet Union, we were quite clear that the Soviets did not proceed from principled positions in the accusations they were making against the Chinese party. As became even clearer later, the differences were over a series of matters of principle which, at that time, the Chinese seemed to maintain correct stands.